What's up, guys? It's Hunter Sitchy from CheckShovPoker.com. This month I decided to do a hand history review of my performance in the 1K online WSOP bracelet event that I took second in this summer for $116,000. So what ended up happening was I played through the first two breaks of this tournament and managed to run up 117K stack from 15K starting. At that point I realized that I should probably be recording my play, so I fired up Camtasia and managed to get 5.5 hours of solid online footage. After play was over, I exported the footage and condensed it down to only the hands that I played, which was about 43 minutes worth of footage. And now I'm replaying it in QuickTime so that we can play it at twice the normal speed. So hopefully you guys can pick up a few things that will boost your win rate here as I review these hand histories. With that being said, enjoy. So first hand back from break, I get aces on the button, and Grubendonk opens it up to 2,600. I need Masari folds, and Jesse Will ends up calling. I decide to 3-bet to 7,600. The reason I chose that sizing is because it's between 1/4 and 1/5 of both of their stacks. All I'm doing is giving them room to shove over the top of me if they decide to shove light. They both end up folding and I take down the pot, and in this next hand I have Queen 10 in the hijack. Grubendonk folds and I need Masari calls out of the big blind. And this flop is actually really interesting. So before I do anything, when I'm about to see that, I ask myself, are there turn cards where I can continue with my aggression? And in this situation, that's definitely the case. Any ace, king, queen, jack, 10, or 8 either improves my equity, gives me the best hand, or changes the structure of the board in a way that my range benefits more than my opponent's range. Because of that, I decided to c-bet in this spot. And I c-bet a third of the pot because that's all I need to leverage a situation where I need Masari has to commit his entire stack in order to continue with this hand. And although he check shoves, I still think that's a great play. And in this situation, I open Queen Jack under the gun. Under normal circumstances, I would only be opening King Queen offsuit or better in this situation, but because there are 6 short stacks at the same table, I can open much lighter than normal because I put their stacks at risk. Unfortunately, Mr. Verve decides to 3-bet out of the blinds, and that's a spot where nobody's ever 3-betting light against an under the gun opener, especially when he has to call off his entire stack. So because of that, I just decide to fold Queen Jack. I'm probably crippled in that spot. In this situation, I min-raise 7-6 off on the button. That's kind of an exploit, but I decided to do it because the two guys to my left were playing way too tight. They 3-bet me, I fold, I lose 2 big blinds, no problem. Now in this spot, I have pocket aces and Jesse Will opens to 3,500. I decide to 3-bet to 8K, and the reason I did that is because it's about 1/5 of his stack, and that allows him to perceive the situation to have fold equity and possibly shove lighter than he normally would with a hand like ace-jack or ace-10. He ends up shoving with pocket 10s and I snap, and I didn't outplay him in any way in this situation, but I gave him an opportunity to make a mistake and shove with a hand that he shouldn't be shoving with. On this next hand, I have King 7 suited in the cutoff, and I open for the same reasons that I opened 7-6 off on the button earlier. Girl on Fire and Fast Rock are just playing way too tight. Grubendonk ends up tanking for a little bit and 3-betting to 20K, which is basically his entire stack, and I'm forced to fold King 7 suited. So notice that I'm stealing in spots where I don't have to call off with a weak hand like that. He had enough that I could fold if he shoved. Now I'm opening ace 10 suited under the gun for the same reasons that I opened Queen Jack offsuit under the gun a little bit ago. There are just 6 shorties at this table, and they have to play much tighter than normal because of their stack sizes, and I'm just taking advantage of that. Now this hand is really interesting. I have ace 6 offsuit on the button, and a game theory optimal 3-betting range doesn't include ace 6 offsuit, but in this spot I chose to 3-bet it because I can 3-bet to 2.5 times my opponent's open and exactly 1/6 of his stack. So if you've watched my other instructional videos, you know that 3-betting to 1/6 of your opponent's stack is probably the strongest bet sizing possible. And this is a great spot because I have the ace blocker, so it weakens his range even more. All in all, that's an excellent spot to 3-bet light. So now we come back from break and I have Queen 10 suited in early position, and I open it up for the same reasons as before. All these guys are really short and they have to play a little bit tighter than normal, and because of that I'd like to put pressure on the blinds from an earlier position with a slightly weaker hand. And I raise and take it. Now this spot's pretty interesting. I have Jack 7 off, and this guy only has 7K, or so just over 2 big blinds, and he min raises to 6K, so I have 1, 2, 3, almost 4 to 1 odds to get it in here. So if he showed me aces, it would be close. If he shows me any hand where I have 1 overcard, I definitely have to get it in, and if I have 2 overcards, I'm golden, so I just click it back and we get it in. I end up running into pocket 7s, which isn't a big deal for 2.5 big blinds, and the board runs out that, and I lose. No big deal. This next hand I have Ace King. Now some people might disagree with my decision here, but fire bets opens and I decide to flat the button with Ace King. The reason I did that is because at this point I was second in chips with like 50 players left to go, and this guy was the only guy in the tournament that had me covered, and I just don't see a reason to put my stack at risk when I have so much play left in my stack against the rest of the players in the tournament. There's no point in getting Ace King in on a flip in that spot. My chip utility is much more important. And I ended up flatting. That keeps a lot of Firebet's weaker hands in his range, and it allows me to get away on a flop like that for 2 big blinds. Now this spot is interesting. I'm grinding is Craig Varnell. He's a guy that ended up taking 3rd in this event, and he ended up winning the WPT 500 2 days later. He's pretty good. And I decided to flat Ace Jack suited because he opens really, really wide under the gun, wider than any player I've ever seen before. And I wanted to keep all of those weak hands in his range and also save myself if somebody decides to shove over the top. Then something weird happened. We ended up going 5 ways to this flop, which is very rare in a 1K buy-in tournament. On the turn, put you to the test ends up getting put to the test when he leads out for, I believe, 12K. And Craig decides to essentially min raise to 26K. If anyone at the table was capable of bluffing in this spot, it would be Craig, but it's so hard for him to be bluffing when there are 3 players behind him that I ended up just having to fold Ace Jack. I think this spot is too thin to commit my stack when I still have so much playability left. Put you to the test ends up folding, and Craig takes down the pot. Maybe I should text him and see what he had. Ace 5 on the button, I open it up. I think this is a totally standard situation, and Plattsburgh ends up reshipping for a bunch, and I have to fold. Next hand, I have King Queen suited in the hijack, and I just raise and take it. Hand after that, I have Ace Jack, and I decide to ship 15 bigs or 16 bigs. I think that's a totally standard reship if 2-sick is opening 20% of hands or wider, which I'm sure he was. At that point, it doesn't matter how he structures his opening range or his calling range versus my shove. It's just an automatic get in. I either have enough fold equity or enough equity when called to shove 15 bigs. I run into 10s and I spike an ace, and that's how you win tournaments. Now in this hand I have pocket 9s and a min raise, totally standard. it ends up getting interesting when Mr. Terry, who at the time was the chip leader, decides to flat, which is very strange for a chip leader to be doing. And then Cinderella Man makes it 55K from an 8 big blind stack. I have to get it in versus him, although I was a little bit weary of the range of hands that he's raising so small with. But I don't have to worry about Mr. Terry at all, because the only way he has a better hand than me in that spot is if he's colluding. Good thing was I had him covered by a lot. Now I min raise Ace Jack. And you can see me checking the payouts because we were on a payout bubble at that point. In this spot, it limps to me in the big blind, and I decide to just check Ace-6 suited because I think shoving 20 bigs is a little bit too wide. King Silas leads out, and I'm just forced to fold. I didn't want to ISO there because that exposes me to the limp shove, and I just didn't really want to deal with that or expose my equity to that. This next hand I have Ace-9 suited, and I min raise. Mr. Terry flats the button. I don't know why he was flatting so much when he was the chip leader. And then the flop comes Jack 10, 5, rainbow, and this is the worst board possible to c-bet with my hand. It just smashes Mr. Terry's flatting range and 2-6 calling range out of the big blind, so I was forced to give up. I don't even think I would c-bet this board if I had a diamond on it, even with backdoor diamonds and backdoor flush draw potential. I think this board is just too strong for Mr. Terry for me to be following through. And they end up playing it out. If I was in 2-6 spot, I'm definitely calling this large river bet because Mr. Terry's line makes 0 sense. I was really struggling to come up with a hand that he could have that beats whatever 2-6 is calling with, and he ends up just spiking a 2-outer on the river, so that is 2-6. Now some people ask me what I'm doing here. Small blind versus big blind, I limp my entire range, and the reason for that is pretty simple. I'm getting an incredibly good price to continue with a very wide range of hands, and I can continue with more hands by limping than I can by opening to 2.5 or 3x. And even when you do open to 2.5 or 3x, you're not accomplishing much because the big blind is getting incredible odds to call you in position because of the antes. So I feel like I can accomplish more by limping my entire range and then structuring my limp raising range to include hands like 8s through aces and ace king, ace queen, ace jack, and then I also have a limp shoving range that's where I can shove light with like ace deuce through ace 5 suited. And I also have a limp calling range, and overall it's pretty well balanced, and my limping range is protected enough that Plattsburgh can't profitably shove in this spot. He's going to run into some big hands enough of the time that he can't shove that big and get that through profitably long term. Now in this situation I'm a little bit short, and I end up having to shove with 5s. Very standard, and luckily I get it through. Non-showdown winnings are huge in tournaments. This turned Plattsburgh min raises under the gun, and he was opening really light. So I ended up doing something that I think a lot of people wouldn't do. Cinderella Man calls, and I decide to ship over the top of them instead of just calling and taking like my 6 or 7 to 1. And it's really just because Plattsburgh was opening so wide that I felt like I could get it in good a huge percentage of the time. I end up running into 10s, but luckily I was running good with ace jack on this day, and I flop trips and double up. On this next hand, I just limp with queen 9. Again, I'm limping my entire continuance range, and I decide to lead out. So some people don't understand how these paired boards work in these blind versus blind situations, but I have the strongest range on this board because Plattsburgh chose not to isolate me, and because of that my range is uncapped while his range is a bit more capped. So it's almost like I had the initiative pre-flop, even though I limped. I still have all the kings in my range and all of the big pairs and diamond draws in my range. Because of that, I can lead out with confidence. Plattsburgh ends up min raising me, and this is a spot where I'm not going to fight back because although he might be min raising me too much in position, it's not worth risking a third of my stack to fight back in a spot where those precious big blinds have way more utility than just kind of attacking a thin spot like this. Now here's another spot where I may have made a mistake. So when I have roughly 15 big blinds and it's going to be close between calling and folding to a shove, I think it might actually be better to just shove 15 bigs and put more pressure on overcards like King 10 in this spot, because I'm not really ever going to be able to induce a shove from a hand that I beat in this situation. Because of that, it's probably better to just maximize my fold equity. But at the same time, I like to keep my range balanced, and I'd like to just min raise with my entire range at this stack depth. And I think it would be pretty exploitable if anybody knew that I was shoving with a hand like pocket sevens, but then min raising with much bigger hands and much weaker hands. It's going to be difficult for me to balance multiple bet sizes in this spot, so I'm kind of conflicted, and I'm interested in what you guys have to say about this situation. Ultimately, I end up folding to the shove because I feel like the guys at this table were folding so often that my non-showdown winnings were high enough that I could make up for folding it in a slightly plus EV situation. Now in this next hand, I decide to just min raise with sixes, and I get it through. And now I've got ace-7 off on the button. And here's an interesting c-betting situation that I think a lot of people don't really understand yet. So most people are checking back ace-high on this board. I'm actually c-betting in this spot because I have the ace of clubs. And the reason for that is to balance out my range on the turn the times that a club comes off. Because most people are checking back all their ace-high, and then whenever a club comes off, they always just have the nuts. I'd like to be able to have some big equity the times that a club comes off, but not necessarily the nuts. So by betting with the ace of clubs there, it balances out my range a bit on certain runouts. Now this next hand I have aces, which is always very helpful when you're trying to win tournaments. Stoner Boner ends up calling out of the big blind, and I check back on this flop. So if you're going to slow play on this flop, slow play with aces because you have an equity lock. There are no overcards that you have to worry about. So now when he leads out for 45K, it's a toss-up between calling this bet and then calling any river bet, or raising very small and potentially inducing him to shove. I come from a cash game background, and I think raising small is a little bit better here, especially against a very aggressive player like Stoner Boner, who is definitely capable of shoving with clubs or with a jack in this spot. Because of that, I go for the smaller raise, and it's not like it has to be interpreted as me having aces in this spot. A lot of people check back with ace-king high or ace-queen high, and then they decide that they don't want to fold to the turn stab, and they do something weird like raise small. So it definitely is not like I'm turning my hand face up in that spot. That can be a difficult spot if he's thinking on the same level that I'm thinking. This hand, some people would just call here. I greatly prefer to just buy up all of Plattsburgh's equity and put a tremendous amount of pressure on him by just shoving with ace-queen, and a lot of times I'm going to get called by a worse hand. This spot I limp with 8-7 again, and he shoves. Again, this is just the bottom of my range. My range is actually well protected, and I don't really have to worry about being exploitable in that spot if I'm limp folding. Now I have Jack-9 on the button. I open it up for a min raise. I get the shove, and I fold. King-Queen suited from the hijack, and I min raise and take it down. Now in this spot I decide to call out of the big blind with Jack-10 suited because I'm never getting called by worse if I shove. I'd prefer to just utilize my pot odds. Now, in this spot, when Plattsburgh c-bets, in a cash game, I would be peeling in this spot because any ace, king, queen, jack, 10, 9, 8, or diamond either gives me the best hand or strengthens my range or improves my equity. But in this situation, when stacks are really short, the utility of those precious few blinds that I would waste by floating in this spot is probably more valuable than check calling here. So that's why I decided to do that. I ended up just check folding and letting him take it. This next hand I have ace king. And I raise and take it. On this hand, I decide to call out of the big blind for the same reasons that I called with Jack 10 suited on that earlier hand. If I shove, I'm never really getting called by a worse hand, and I prefer to just use pot odds in my advantage and see a cheap flop. And then I'm forced to check fold on an ace high board. Now, in this spot, I believe we were on the final table bubble, or at least close to it. So I looked at the other table to make sure that I had all the information that I needed, and I ended up getting it in with ace king suited versus ace 10, and I hold up. So that was a huge turning point in the tournament for me. Now in this spot, I have 20 big blinds, so it's too much to shove. Part of being a poker genius is just being able to flop two pair and then get value. So I lead out for a half pot, Cinderella man calls. My decision on this river is questionable. I chose to check. The reason I chose to check was because I felt that Cinderella man would value bet an ace for me. And the times that he rivers two pair with a hand like ace 10, jack 10, or 10-7, I'd like to be able to put in a check raise because I never have to worry about running into a hand like king queen or 9-8. He just doesn't have those hands in his range. He would have c-bet with those. So that's why I ended up checking. But Cinderella man thought a level further and ended up checking back on ace. And I'm not sure if he outplayed me or he just is a nit. I'll let you guys decide. 10-5, I just limp fold again. Queen 10, I go for the min raise and get flooded by slop house. Here's another spot where some people might disagree with what I did. So here's what I was thinking on this flop. The slop house is short enough that he's shoving with aces through deuces universally, and he's always shoving with ace king in this spot. So I have a huge range advantage on this board because my range is still uncapped while his range is very capped, and that's why I decided to follow through. Then when he called on this flop, I was really confused because he just shouldn't ever have anything strong. Like, I mean, he might have 5-6 suited or 6-7 suited or a hand like king queen or king jack, but the rest of his range consists of weak ace highs and floats like 8-7 of hearts, spades, diamonds, or like 9-8 or 10-9 of hearts, spades, diamonds, and I felt like I needed to follow through and just force all of those hands along with ace high to fold. I'm risking a half pot bet, so I only need him to fold a third of the time for this to be profitable. And I ship, and he ends up going into the tank and then calling with the nuts. So I feel like maybe he was trying to slow roll me and tilt me, or maybe he was multi-tabling. I'm not sure. This next hand, I reship ace queen, totally standard situation, and I get it through. And now I have pocket fives, and this is a very similar situation to the hand where I had pocket sevens. So this was also on the final table bubble, so I had a tremendous amount of leverage when I ship here, and there are several stacks shorter than me. So I can put a huge amount of pressure on overcards, and even to the point where sevens and sixes might fold in this spot just because a huge pay jump is coming. And at the same time, I don't really want to min raise and induce a shove from somebody else because I'm not really going to get them to shove with a hand that I dominate. So that's why I ended up doing that, and I got it through. I'm interested to to see what you guys think about my shove here. King 9 suited in the cutoff, and I open it up. I get shoved on and I fold. So you see that I can risk 2 big blinds over and over and over again, and they're still folding way too often, even all these times that I have to fold to the reship. Now in this spot, it limps around, and had I been shorter, had I had like 15 big blinds, I definitely would have shipped over the top of both of them and just assumed that Anthony Spinella, who is case dismissed, has a capped range in this spot. In this case, I had more chips than that, and I decided to just knock it back and take my free equity. Now I have Jack 10 on the button. I open it up and get flatted by Spinella, and he checks to me. Jack 10 is a mandatory c-bet on this board because I have a gut shot and backdoor clubs and a huge range advantage on an ace and king high board. This is the first hand of final table play, and Teddy Bear, who is David Tuttleman, opens under the gun, and I reship with eights. After he got knocked out of live play, he did commentary and he said he folded ace-queen in this spot. I think that's an insane fold. There's no reason for him to ever be folding ace-queen in this spot. He said it was because he thought it was tight. I think if he watches this final table review, he'll realize that I wasn't playing it tight at all. So I have no idea why he went into the tank and folded in this spot. He might have just gotten frozen out because it was the first hand of the final table. I don't know. King 10 suited, standard open. Not much more to say about that. Queen 6 suited, this is probably the most interesting hand that I played in the tournament. I limp my whole range, stoner boner checks. I lead out because I have a range advantage on this board, and also because I have huge equity. And he floats. Now on the turn, the King of Hearts comes off, and this is a spot where if he's playing correctly, he's going to get really sticky the times that he has a 10, a 7, or a draw. And by betting, I could potentially expose my equity to the point where I have to fold to a raise. So I think a better option is to check and either take a free river card and hopefully hit a club or a queen, or check shove and put way more pressure on stoner boner in a spot where nobody takes this line. It's really hard to interpret. So that's what I end up doing. I check shove. This is also known as rip somebody's face off. And he snap folds. Then I have ace king, and Spinella defends out of the big blind. Luckily I flop to pair, and I decide to c-bet a third of the pot. So when you use small sizing like this, the times that you're bluffing, you also have to do it the times that you have a big hand, especially against a player as good as case dismissed. So I can't be tipping anything away with my bet sizing. I go ahead and bet 40% pot on the turn. He calls, and then on the blank river, I thought about shipping, but then I changed my mind because I don't feel like he's going to call it off with a hand like ace jack in this spot if I ship. So I bet a little bit smaller, and he has to pay me off with ace reg. So kind of an unfortunate situation for him. Very lucky for me. He ended up winning it, so I don't really think he can complain. And now I just broke 1,000,000 chips, so that was kind of a tipping point for me. Now I have ace 9 in this spot, and this is very close to a call. It's definitely thin. I decided to lay it down because I just felt like I had some reads on these players, and I could derive other value besides just calling it off in a thin spot with ace 9. Ace queen, raise and take it, and that's the last hand of online play. And after that, I got sent an email, and I ended up showing up at the Thunderdome 2 days later and playing out the rest of the final table. So that's what my next video is going to be on, final table play. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this and gained a few things from it, and hopefully you gain a few more things from my next hand history review on the same tournament. So I'm Hunter Sitchy from CheckShowPoker.com. Make sure that you guys run good, have fun, and constantly look for ways to improve.